So, I'm joined today by Tom Johansmeyer. He's the head of PCS, Property Claim Services, obviously well known in the ILS and reinsurance industry for their provision of catastrophe risk data and other lines of perils. And they're used for triggers within industry loss transactions such as catastrophe bonds and ILWs. So, Tom's joining us today from Bermuda, where he's on lockdown like the rest of us. Tom, how are you doing?
I'm hanging in there, Steve. Thank you for having me.
So, thank you for joining us. So, I know you've been obviously following the COVID-19 pandemic closely for potential ramifications for your client base in the insurance and reinsurance industry. So, I thought we'd talk through some of the themes that we've already touched on in a couple of interviews with you, and then maybe we'll move on to some broader discussion around the potential ramifications for the marketplace. So I thought to start with, it might be nice to, I know you've been using the term silent pandemic risk, so akin to sort of silent cyber, which I know is another hot topic of yours. So do you want to explain what you mean by that and sort of how you see that as relevant in the context of the current pandemic?
Thanks, Steve. Yes. So silent cyber was often used to describe policies that were silent or ambiguous on cyber risk to another line of business, generally property. And we're seeing a similar risk potentially arising in the large property per risk market for pandemic. In the big programs, big companies, big buyers, stuff that's 100, 200 million and up in property cover, where the underlying policies and program language may not go into enough specificity on pandemic or be silent on the issue in general. So we've actually heard from a few people that there are some hints in the large property per risk market that a couple of programs could be affected by the pandemic. The big issue here, and again, 2017's silent cyber issues are a great guide to use, it seems, at least so far. So in 2017, for example, you had a couple of large property programs that were affected by cyber. Why? You had a PD trigger that had to be met before the BI would kick in, and large complex companies that have very diverse worldwide operations, it may not be so hard for them to find the physical damage they need to trigger the BI. That's what we learned in 2017, where four insureds accounted for $3 billion. The same issue appears to be in some of those manuscripts, where you've got large, major international organizations that buy big insurance towers for property. They've got a lot of BI or seeming BI, right? It's not BI yet, it's property estimates and peers. What they need to do is figure out whether or not they have property damage from COVID-19. If you're a big enough company with complex enough operations, there is a greater risk, it seems, that you'll be able to find the PD trigger you need. And there's a sense across the market right now that a couple of these programs are going to be affected this year.
Okay, and that's really interesting in the context of, obviously there's a lot of discussion about the potential for legislation, legal action, governments to potentially force claims through, but this is actually where claims are probably covered due to sometimes looseness of contracts or sometimes contracts that were really never designed with this kind of tail scenario in mind.
Yeah, and then there's a kind of a corollary to that as well with these large property programs. You may have had something excluded early on, and then over several years of soft market conditions after, that stuff gets written back in so that the capacity provider can hold the line on rates. We've seen that in the large risk insurance market and the reinsurance market. And what's interesting is in 2017, when you look at the property programs that were affected by NotPetya, you could see the original wordings had cyber sublimited or excluded, and then ambiguity got written back in over subsequent years of negotiations in a softer market environment. So what I would say is, if I'm a reinsurer covering that market, I'd want to go look at the underlying manuscript policies that are used. And on top of that, I'd also want to take a look at any amendments that came in per account after that. There's a tendency to think in the manuscript large risk market, okay, you got 3 or 4 brokers, you got a couple of big direct writers, so the universe of property forms is fairly contained. So if you look at a couple of them, you pretty much know where the risk is. That's a nice thought, but underneath that, you've got these amendments that get written in on an account-by-account basis. That's where the variability comes in, and that's where a few folks got tripped up in 2017.
Right, okay, that's really interesting. And now we're also seeing some discussion about a number of property catastrophe programs as well, where generally smaller insurers, it seems so far, are trying to find a way to gain coverage under those cat programs, it seems. Is that similar, do you think, or is that likely to be a less of a concern, do you think, for the industry?
It's hard to tell because those languages go treaty by treaty. Those treaties are different, right? The language isn't the same across them. And if you've got bespoke or cedent-driven language for cat definition, you can wind up all over the map. So for us, PCS has come out and said that we don't have a category in our cat definition for infectious disease, for virus, or anything like that. So as a result, we don't see COVID-19 being designated on its own as a PCS cat. If you're using PCS as your cat definition, consistency of language from up through the reinsurance and retro community, that works out really well. It's where you've got the bespoke stuff coming in that you can start to see things get disjointed. So if you've got a reinsurer who's exposed to that sort of program, but then hedges out on an ILW basis, you could see a language mismatch and a coverage mismatch as a result.
Okay, and that's actually something else I wanted to ask you about, because I know it's a topic that you guys have been focusing on, is looking at how there could be the potential, if claims do start to stack up for some of the reinsurers, that their retro may not match identically what's coming in. I guess that's the nature of what is a silent peril in coming through into a policy environment where you've probably protected yourself on a basis where you never expected that to appear. Is that kind of how you're thinking about it?
That's the way it looks, yeah. I mean, we obviously don't have any visibility into the non-PCS stuff, but it wouldn't be the first time there's a mismatch between the underlying reinsurance language and the retro language that goes with it. I mean, we've seen that in cyber, we've seen that in marine and property per risk. It does happen. And it happens because you've got, an underlying program where you operated on a bespoke basis to win the business or have the flexibility, or for whatever reason you decide to deviate from the industry standard, and then you hedge on an industry standard basis. That creates the sort of gap that you naturally have to be prepared to assume if you're writing and hedging differently.
Sure. And are you seeing sort of demand from your customers for hedging solutions right now as a result of this? I know there's been quite a lot of discussion of potential government-backed reinsurance facilities and people talking about parametric triggers, but then there's also always the question of how can you make that sort of coverage really affordable in the current environment as well. What are you seeing from clients and hearing in the market?
I'm not hearing or seeing as much as I'd like to. I think right now we're in a weird spot, right? Because you've got the April renewal just finished, obviously a big one for Japan. And generally what happens after the April renewal is a bunch of ILW trading goes on where people clean up their books after having assumed their usual amount of Japanese risk. And that's an effort right now that's further informed by volatility in financial markets, which is affecting insurers and reinsurers on the asset side. Okay, that's part one. Part two is the Florida renewal coming up June 1st. And that usually involves some May trading as folks clean up their books, make capacity available, and decide what their appetite for Florida is going to be. What that means is that during this kind of April 1st to June 1st period, you've got a lot of really targeted tactical risk transfer activity going on. And you don't see as much non-core trading. I mean, we were making good progress on some cyber ILWs before COVID really got momentum. And that's kind of slowed down. I mean, again, we saw something similar in 2017 when Harvey, Irma, and Maria put the brakes on innovation. So we're kind of taking a breather and making sure that we can recapture the momentum rather than prevent the momentum from disappearing. Big picture on all of this, though, is that when you're focused on Japan, when you're focused on Florida, when you're focused on changes to your risk appetite as a result of asset impairment, the bigger hedge, the bigger projects don't tend to get as much attention. And I think the problem we see here is that for the big hedge for Q4 for COVID-19, right? So we're not just talking an insurance or a reinsurance hedge, we're also talking a broader financial hedge. That's not going to get the attention it requires. And place that sort of there are questions of an autumnal resurgence of COVID-19. You've got that autumnal resurgence could mean massive economic impact in mid-November, which is holiday shopping season. If the consumer is not shopping, the consumer is not spending. That's the biggest lever in the worldwide economy. So that is a massive financial impact.
Sure, yeah.
If you're going to hedge that sort of economic downturn, you need to take action probably now, because 2 months, 3 months from now, you get more certainty one way or the other, most likely, right? You'll either see, oh, okay, well, it doesn't look so bad, so I don't need the hedge, which means the market dries up. Or, oh man, this is going to be a nightmare, getting more and more evident that it's going to be a nightmare, which means nobody wants to write it or write it at a realistic price.
Sure.
So when you think about like a live cat trade, where that process goes on over a couple of days. Here it goes on over several weeks, but the cadence is different. The market dynamic is similar.
It's interesting as well, because I guess this is somewhere that obviously PCS acts as trigger sort of data provider for industry loss-based transactions, but I know that you've also worked on a couple of parametric transactions as well, where a third-party independent sort of data provider is required to sort of facilitate the calculation process for that trigger. Is this somewhere that you guys would be looking to potentially work if you can find counterparties interested to trade? Have you put any effort into trying to find the right triggers for people?
I'd say we're open to it more than we're looking for it. We see a problem in the market right now with parametric reporting. We've seen kind of throughout the past month the gaps in reported cases and fatalities between the WHO and the CDC, and between the CDC and underlying state and local agencies in the US. We've seen similar issues with Santé Publique in France, and also with Public Health England and in some other countries as well. We know that there are gaps in the reporting by authoritative agencies, and we know there are conflicts between the data released by authoritative agencies. That's a problem on a good day. Following 2018 with Jebi and Trami, it's an even bigger problem because we've seen what happens when there are conflicting results from authoritative data sources that are informal ILW triggers. What we see ourselves as being able to do is A, sit between the collection of data sources in the market as in a trusted reporting agency that can make sense of these things and report one realistic number that can then be used. We also think that as a commercial entity, we can be held accountable for our performance where an informal agency can't. You can't call up the WHO and ask them why they're reporting a certain way. You can't do due diligence on them. They just put out a number.
Sure.
Okay, so we solve a couple of problems this way. The reason I say we're not really looking for it right now is that we've just been focused on helping people understand and solve the problem. If some parties got together and decided they wanted to use our thinking just to make a better parametric trigger for pandemic than they've been using, and we're not a part of that process at all, I'm fine with that. I think that right now what the market needs is smart thinking on how to structure a parametric and a certain amount of comfort and reliability that what they've put in place is going to work for them. And you know what? If our thinking goes into the market, it's just doing a favor for everybody at a time like this, I can look myself in the mirror. I'm good with that.
Sure, yeah. And I guess the other interesting thing with parametrics is there's been a wealth of new data emerging because of the pandemic. A lot of big organizations have suddenly put effort into sort of calculating the impact on activity levels and industry levels, and all of those indices are going to become possible triggers in the future as well, or combinable with other metrics. So there's potentially a lot of work to do on the side of parametrics related to pandemic now.
There should be, and I hope there is, and I hope the market embraces this, especially when it comes to business interruption. Because if you're looking to hedge BI, especially non-PD BI, BI is not easy. I mean, it's not like looking at a banged up fender and realizing you got $300 worth of body work. You know, business interruption requires, you know, deep understanding and expertise and time, and the issues that are brought up are more open for discussion than how much it replaces the fender. The parametric makes more sense here because it takes out uncertainty, it takes out the risk of disagreement, it takes out massive amounts of time, and it injects capital into the business owners who need it. So I do hope that the wide range of innovation that's going on out there takes hold. And if we can help fuel some of that, I'll just feel pretty good about it. If we could play a part in that, you know, we're happy to.
Sure. So I realise we're running close on time now, so I just thought I'd ask you, what are your sort of feelings generally about sort of prospects for the ILS market at this time? I know we're seeing some investors cashing out, some investors looking to come in, but people struggling to take in new inflows at the moment. And other than that, seems the asset class as a whole, the performance of it has been admirable again, and it's proven itself as relatively uncorrelated as ever. What's your view on sort of the next few months and then longer term after the pandemic?
I mean, the supreme irony is that, you know, the performance has been so admirable that people are withdrawing to go deploy opportunistically to distressed assets at a time like this, which I think in the long term, what really matters is the admirable performance of the sector shows that it's doing its job. There will always be temporary moves based on market conditions as folks deploy some unique opportunities, but they know that the long-term of its job will be there, and that capital should come back over time. I find that promising. The one thing I do worry about is in the near term, if there is a shortage of capacity relative to standard needs like the Florida market or retro and ILW trading after the Florida renewal, which is important. Yeah, that short-term friction could cause some pain that will have knock-on effects through the rest of the year and through the 1/1 renewal. We don't know that that's going to happen. It's something I keep an eye on, and I hope other folks are as well. It could be an issue. I look at things like the shortfall in retro capacity in the cyber market, which was an issue already coming into this year. That problem's not going to go away and will probably intensify with the uncertainty around COVID-19 and the heightened threat environment that comes with the chaos that hackers enjoy. We need to sort out cyber retro more than ever. So I do hope that kind of once we've got Florida past us, more and more folks can start to put some attention into getting those first couple of cyber ILW trades so that come November, December, this is one less big problem to worry about.
Sure. That's great, Tom. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed listening to the bird song behind you there in Bermuda. So all that's left to say is stay safe and hope to catch up with you soon. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you, Steve. Take care as well.